Marketer of the Day, number 455. Speak your ideal customer's secret language, rise above the noise, and make your business irresistible with Jeffrey Shaw. Hey everyone, and thanks for listening. We're talking right now with Jeffrey Shaw. So having a keen eye isn't just for what one sees, but also for what one senses. Having been one of the most sought-after portrait photographers in the US for more than 3 decades, Jeffrey Shaw, aka the Lingo Guy, uses this honed intuition to attract and maintain specific markets by speaking their secret language. Jeff is host of the popular business podcast Creative Warriors, which is he is a nationally acclaimed keynote speaker, a business coach for entrepreneurs, and he's the author of the forthcoming book, Lingo, Discover Your Ideal Customer's Secret Language and Make Your Business Irresistible. So, Jeff, glad to be talking to you right now.
I'm thrilled to be here with you, Robert. Thank you.
Super great. So, what makes you stand out? What makes you unique?
Me as an individual, as a business. Well, I think what makes me unique is this idea of the secret language. You know, I as my bio said, I started out as a photographer more than 3 decades ago, more than 30 years ago. And it wasn't until the last couple of years that I really got in touch with how I built such a successful photography business. And I wound up, I was photographing the super affluent in the United States. And the result of really kind of that self-study of asking myself, how is it that I built such a successful business, and how as a business coach have I helped others? What I realized was that this idea of a secret language. So I think what makes me unique is that I have always had a very high level of empathy, not just for individuals, but also with a sensitivity towards market trends. And, have always looked for what is the secret language going on here? How can I connect deeper with the target market, the ideal customer that I want to reach?
Okay, so I'm not sure I understand exactly what this secret language idea means. Yeah. So can you kind of unpack that a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. In marketing, we hear a lot about buyer persona and avatars. And, a lot of marketing has been really focused on demographics, statistics, and at best, even behaviors, right? Cookies track our behaviors. It's not going to be enough moving forward. I believe what consumers really want moving forward is for you to have a deeper sense of what makes them tick, what's in their heart. Because, Robert, what makes the tightest bond in business is when people feel like you really get them, right? When if you feel like somebody gets you, it supersedes price. We will pay more to be in relationship with a business or devotion to our brand when we feel like, man, that brand really gets me. It speaks on my behalf. So the idea of a secret language is kind of what I refer to as the evolution of buyer personas and avatars, where we go way beyond, surface level understanding of people and really get into their hearts and create a bond where they feel like, like you're literally speaking a secret language, like you get each other at a deeper level. Does that unpack it?
Yeah, it's getting there. So what does that look like exactly? Because you mentioned a secret language, and let me just tell you what kind of a few things come to mind. One thing comes to mind is the whole idea of mirroring someone else's keywords and phrases and things like that. Something else that comes to mind is the whole idea of there's all these there's these systems like Infusionsoft, things like that, where you can tag your subscribers and send a specific message to a subgroup. So is that on the right track? Or what does the secret language look like when put into practice?
Yeah, so a lot of it, from my perspective, a lot of it's around branding. Because one of the biggest challenges businesses face is that they're not working with their ideal customer all the time, right? You probably know the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule that says 80% of your income comes from 20% of your customers. In today's business world, especially small business entrepreneurs, who can afford that? Who can afford 8 out of 10 of your customers to not be the right customers? So for me, I look at the secret language as a building of a brand, not just a message, but your entire identity. And in the book Lingo, I lay it out in 5 steps, because it's the awareness of understanding the perspective of the ideal customer, and then it's actually creating a brand image so that you're calling forward and maintaining your ideal customers. One of the things people respond to all the time when we talk about only working with your ideal customers, they fear having to say no. if you actually are speaking the secret language through your branding and the way you build your business to your ideal customer, there really isn't a whole lot of people to say no to because you're not drawing them in the first place. Like, Robert, I'll give you an example. If you've ever traveled to a foreign country, and I had a very distinctive memory of this happening to me in Venice. You're on one of the boats, everybody around you is speaking Italian. I don't speak Italian. Right? So to me, it's just all white noise, kind of a murmur. But the moment somebody on the boat speaks English, my native language, it's like I hear that clearly, crisply, and almost at a higher volume than everything else. Your head kind of whips around. That's what excellent branding, when speaking the secret language of your ideal customer, is like. It's like they can see you, hear you above everybody else because you're speaking their language.
Great, and yeah, I can definitely relate to that feeling. It's kind of like if there's even if it's the same language, if there's a bunch of conversations happening, and then like you hear your name mentioned, you're like, wait a second, like I didn't hear any other noise, but then I picked up on that one thing, and I can definitely relate to the idea of maybe only have 20% of the ideal customers that we want to have, because I was just having a discussion like this with my business partner this morning, and we were talking about how, like there's definitely like there's the whole list of, business owners and online business owners, people like that. But there's definitely a huge chunk that they haven't really taken a lot of action yet. They don't really want to spend a lot of money. They're more focused on like the work they have to do as opposed to the strategy. And then there's like the very small subgroup that we really like. And it would be great if that small subgroup was the whole list. And so I'm really fascinated by this idea of the lingo. And so can you break down what those 5 steps are? And I assume going forward that the first one is L, first one starts with L, the next one starts with I, stuff like that.
It doesn't. I didn't turn it into an acronym. Although the thought occurred to me. I know, right? I just couldn't fit the words into the acronym well enough. But no, the first one is the perspective, and this is about understanding your ideal customer, and it's critical to everything else. Like you can't move forward, you can't go past go until you first really understand the perspective of the people you're going to serve. If you're serving if whatever you're doing, whether it's a service or product, if it's being developed, or think about Snapchat, right? The developers of Snapchat, they had to understand the mindset of their initial target audience, which were young folks, right? Social media is actually a great example, by the way, of secret language, because it could be, or seemingly could be, a really competitive field, right? But how is it that there's a space for every one of them? Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram. There's a space for each of them because they're each speaking a different language, right? We communicate entirely different on Facebook and LinkedIn than we do on Twitter or Instagram, right? So that's the thing with a secret language. Like it thwarts competition. Right, because every field is so competitive, but if you align to the secret language of your ideal customer, but foundational to all of it is perspective. You have to get into the shoes of the people that you want to reach, your ideal customer. Without that, you can't move forward. You can't go anyplace else after that. You have to really understand what the world looks like from their perspective. Second step is familiarity, which actually is one of my favorite steps, because it's you don't want to reinvent the wheel here. The idea of familiarity is we are naturally, as consumers, as humans, we are naturally drawn to what is familiar to us. In fact, as I was saying before about native language on a boat in Venice, what is familiar to us jumps out, right? So, you want to build a brand for your ideal customer that is at least familiar to them. It should feel comfortable. That's one thing I say about familiarity. Feels comfortable. It creates comfort. We're drawn to comfort. As Americans, we have very strict traditions around Thanksgiving and certain holidays, and those traditions are built in the fact that it's the same way all the time. It's not to say you have to copy any other brand, but to your ideal customer, it should feel like a familiar place to be. Third step
real quick, what does that look like exactly? So with the perspective idea, like that makes perfect sense. Like, the way you communicate on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram is, unique to each one of those, but what is that? How does that express itself in terms of like a business? Like, how can a business be familiar?
Well, it should feel familiar, and the word "feel" is an important part there. Now, Robert, I'm sure you've been in high-end stores and you've been in discount stores, right? And to a degree, we can be comfortable in both. But for example, I'm horribly uncomfortable in Home Depot. Nothing wrong with Home Depot. I just don't like the cavernous space, and it's an uncomfortable atmosphere to me. But every target audience, every market has a different feel to it. So in the high end, for example, if you go into a high end store, things are going to be merchandised a certain way. It's going to tend to be pretty sparse and very clean. lights are dimly lit. It's got an atmosphere and a feeling to it. Whereas on the lower end, you go into a place like, Walmart, again, nothing against Walmart. In fact, our strategy is very clean, right? So there's no right or wrong here. It's just, is your approach and your alignment with your ideal customer clean? Walmart's alignment with their customers is very clean, right? There's a reason why the stores feel a little chaotic. There's a reason why, pricing, which we're going to go into in a moment, is structured the way it is, right? So whether it's a website, your promotional materials, brick and mortar, if you have that, once you understand your ideal customer, it should feel familiar to them. You don't want to take a high-end customer and bring them into your brand, which feels chaotic and low-end, because that's not going to appeal to them.
Awesome. I don't think I'm going to look at a Home Depot or a Lowe's or a Kohl's or a Target or a Walmart or any place the same way again. I'm not going to look at it as it's kind of set up as that, what that category of store looks like. Awesome.
Yeah, it's intentional. I mean, to me, a lot of the stores like that, there's look at IKEA. IKEA is an amazing example of this, right? Their whole model is you work for it, right? You work for it. You have to go down this long line. You have to ultimately put the stuff together. That only suits a certain type of person.
It's like a Costco.
Right. There's that a lot of sometimes the chaos, we take it for granted. We might even complain about it, but the fact of the matter is we're drawn, if we're in that market, we're drawn to that feeling of accomplishment. That's what I think IKEA is going for. It's like a total feeling of accomplishment. You've survived the store, you picked out your merchandise, you pulled it off the shelves, you got it home, you built it yourself. It's like, yeah, I did this myself, right? That doesn't appeal to everybody, but for their ideal customer, it does. The people that want to have a feeling of self-accomplishment.
That's super interesting.
Yeah, I think it's all very intentional. It's very intentional. So to move on to the third step is style. Style, because it's so surface level, I think a lot of times it's overlooked, but style is the decision maker. We live in such a fast-paced world. Robert, I can tell, by your energy, you're on the go. We make really quick decisions based on what? A very surface level style. We give websites 5 to 7 seconds to prove their value to us. And it usually is based on whether that the feeling of that website, the style of that website resonates for us or not. We walk down malls, we walk down main streets all the time. We decide instantly based on the style of something, whether that is right for us. And a lot of that style, it might be price point, it might be, age bracket. You kind of look at a Talbot's, you kind of know, you can kind of get a sense of what the age bracket is they're going for. Abercrombie and Fitch, pretty obvious age bracket, right? We're making decisions all the time. We walk down Main Street USA and we decide all the time on businesses and brands, that style's for me, that style's not, based on where we are in our lives. So again, you want to align the style that of your ideal customer. You want to understand, which is why you have to understand their perspectives, so that you can build your assets online, offline, in the style that causes your ideal customer to instantly say, that's for me. I belong there.
So basically, sharper image versus a hot topic. You go in there, you're like, I can instantly tell if I'm at the right place that I want.
Yeah, exactly. It should be, like I said, we decide quickly, and then it should be like, I belong here or not. We're making this decision visually all the time. We're on websites, and a lot of it is price point. And that's one of the big gaps I see in businesses' branding is they don't give a clear indication of their price point. It should look high end, low end, or value conscious or cost conscious, right? That should be right up front so that people are making a decision. And again, if the end goal is to only work with your ideal customers, you actually want to be like a megaphone for your ideal customers, and you want to filter out the people that aren't your ideal customers so that you're not in a position of saying no all the time. They're just not showing up. And price point is certainly one of them, which is the next step, is understanding the pricing psychology.
And real quick, before moving
Sure.
on with the pricing, like you're making me think back to even just the other day, I was looking at these different websites that provided like a sort of high-end service, like a few $1,000s a month, and all these different websites had kind of the wide, full width, big graphics, not a lot of text on their different websites. And I was looking at them, and there was one that was like the long sales letter with like the old school kind of font and told a big long story. And for whatever reason, it just felt like that one didn't belong, but not in a good way. Like it was a kind of mismatch, and not like it was trying to stand out and be its own brand or whatever, but just like it seemed like I was just not at the right place for that. It was like supposed to be selling me a high ticket monthly service, but it looked like kind of like low ticket one time thing. So I can definitely relate to what you're saying there of like, it's one thing to be like, well, if I walk into a storefront, I can tell if I'm there or not. But like even on some of these websites, some people are thinking, well, I'm just going to put up a web page and for whatever. But if it's not even the same kind of web page, and never mind like the colors or whatever, but even just like a bunch of text versus not a lot of text, like I can definitely relate to feeling like I'm in kind of a mismatched website.
Yeah, exactly. I'm glad you mentioned font because I'm that particular. It's like, yeah, I mean, Papyrus is just an outdated font. You use an outdated font, people are going to get that feeling that this is a business that isn't paying attention. So most definitely, and that's the beautiful thing here. I mean, most of us, in one way or another, are online businesses. So even if you have a brick and mortar, chances are you have an online business as well. And this applies in both. And a lot of times, to really understand the style of your ideal customer, it may, as it was for me, it may mean visits to brick and mortar stores that are the brands that your ideal customer is buying. Then you just translate what you learn there to your online presence, right? But there should be a coordination between what's the style of your ideal customers and the way that you're presenting yourself. People are making very surface level decisions every moment of every day on whether they want to do business with you, totally based on whether that style feels like it resonates for them or not.
Awesome.
Yeah. So pricing, man, what I like to say about pricing is pricing creates perception, and you literally any business can position itself anywhere in the market they choose to based on pricing and the perception that it gives. And the pricing perception is both literal in the price that it is, but then also visual. We were talking before about Walmart. One thing that drives me crazy about entrepreneurs and small businesses is how often they will complain about the cost-conscious customer, which a lot of us don't want. We don't want the customer that nickels and dimes us, unless you do. There's a place for that. But a lot of us don't necessarily want to work with the highly cost-conscious customer who's going to talk about price or try to talk us down on our prices all the time. And yet you look at their businesses and you realize how much attention they have drawn to cost. Right. So if you're going to draw a lot of attention to your cost, then in fact you are going to draw forward cost-conscious customers. Right. Walmart, for example, that's their whole strategy. That's why they have entire ad campaigns around rollback prices. They go to great lengths to draw a lot of attention to their prices because they are in fact reaching the cost-conscious customer. That's why their prices are down to the 100th of a cent. Right. So you feel as the consumer, you don't feel like you have paid even more than 100th of a cent more than you should have to. The other thing that, in my book, Lingo, it opens with a story, which was a turning point moment for me at 23 years old, where my photography business had been failing for 3 years. And I went to Bergdorf Goodman in New York City. And if you're not familiar with it, Bergdorf Goodman is a one-of-a-kind department store on Fifth Avenue, New York City, super high end. And I went there so that I could understand, to truly understand the perspective of an affluent clientele who I felt would be the only people that would really understand and value the portrait photography I was producing. And what I noticed was that the pricing, not only was the pricing entirely different in that it was rounded off, whole numbers. Everything was $50, $500, $3,000. No hundredths of a cent. But what really struck me, Robert, and I still get amused at this every day, if you go into a high-end store, you're hard-pressed to find a register. You go to a place like Bergdorf Goodman, you won't find a cash register. They're not obvious. They're in back rooms, they're hidden behind merchandise, or they're discreetly off to the side. And yet we go to Target, we go to Walmart, we go to most department stores that are geared towards mass markets. The registers are lined up as soon as you walk in the front door.
Interesting.
Isn't that odd? Right. So, but think about the psychology of that, right? When you walk in the front door, there's the registers right in front of you, so it is designed to be somewhat cost conscious.
Yeah,
different levels.
You know what that reminds me? Makes me think of like if you walk into like a diner or like an IHOP or a Denny's or something, registers right there in the front. But you walk into like a dimly lit Italian restaurant, you're not going to see registers.
Right, exactly. That's a great example. I might put that in the book, but that's a great example.
Go for it.
No, it's true though. You walk into a diner or something lower end, there's the register. You go to a nice restaurant, they take your credit card and a nice leather folio and take it to a back room.
Yeah.
right? There's a whole psychology behind that, and it's all part of the psychology of pricing psychology, which is, on the high end, numbers are rounded off, they're vague, or if you use the example of a high end restaurant, they're non-existent. A high end restaurant is so not cost conscious, they don't even put prices on the menu. You shouldn't care, or you shouldn't be there, right? Whereas, in the low end, McDonald's, what does McDonald's promote? Their dollar menu. Everything is
Right.
under a dollar, very cost conscious. So there's a whole psychology. And again, you can take any business. I give an example in the book Lingo about the hierarchy of restaurants, where in a high end restaurant, no prices on the menu. Down one step in the hierarchy of restaurants, and a steak will be $35, but it'll be on the menu as just a 3 and a 5, no dollar sign, no decimal point, no zeros. You come down one more notch in the hierarchy of restaurants, and the steak will still be $35, but now you've got a dollar sign, a decimal point, 2 zeros, right? A little bit, you're getting a different feeling already. Next restaurant, you go next door to the next restaurant, that same piece of steak is $34.99. Right.
Right.
It's a whole different vibe. You can literally position, and you want to position your business by the pricing psychology that aligns with your ideal customer. There was I'll kind of tell you an inside scoop. So I had this photography business 33 years ago that was failing, and it became very clear to me that I needed to serve a luxury market, because what I was selling was a luxury item, and I'm trying to sell it originally to people who couldn't afford luxury. So I sought out a luxury market. There was a period of time there where my pricing structure in my hometown where I was starting was very basic prices. In the town in which I was starting my business, my prices were upwards of 5 times greater. Same product. But in order for me to position myself in a high-end market that was going to be appreciated for quality, I in fact had to multiply my prices by 5 times, simply to gain the perception that it was going to be a quality product, that I was aligned with the values of the people that lived there. So pricing creates a tremendous amount of perception. It doesn't have to be a big difference in dollars and cents. A lot of it is how you also present it. Yeah, how it
Interesting.
visually looks. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and as you're building on all these, like you're making me aware of like all these little small touches, and maybe every website we go to from now on, or every business or product we see, or like even when we're out to like a storefront or whatever, like now we're all going to notice all these little tiny things, and we might have thought it in all these simple terms up until now. We might have thought like, oh, here's a fancy store, here's like kind of a lower quality store. But now, I mean, there's all these different, attributes, factors now that now we can all be attuned to in at a store or at other people's websites.
Yeah, and I love, Robert, that you're pointing that out, because that to me is what I love talking about lingo and secret language, is that when I talk about it, it does just that. It like wakes people up to this reality, which is what this big life-changing moment I had at 23 years old, was being woken up to this reality of like, holy cow, there's a secret language going on. Like, I may have grown up a lower middle class kid. My parents didn't have much. That's all I knew. But then when I started gaining information about other markets, other consumers, I realized, man, there's a whole secret language going on here. It's not that I'm not good enough at what I do. It's the problem was I was trying to speak the wrong language to the wrong people. And that in the book, I compare it to radio frequencies. There's like different frequencies that people are tuned into, that people enjoy. That's the beauty of secret language. And I charge your listeners, in fact, to start noticing it. Start noticing the psychology of what's going on around you all the time, and play with it. Go to high-end stores, go to low-end stores, and really look at the differences on how these things are marketed, as well as everything in between. So as I say, there's a secret language in every market. It's not just high end, low end. It's everything in between. Because there's a language of your ideal customer. There's a secret language for teenagers and all the different age brackets as well, genders.
Yeah, and it's really just like just occurring to me this whole time that we're talking about this, that if people are having difficulties getting things to catch on, if they're not making sales, or if they're having all this bad customer feedback, it might be that things are just mismatched a little bit. Sort of like if you watch like a movie and like an actor is like, they cast the wrong actor in that role and it kind of ruined the movie. It's like, well, it's not that the actor itself is bad or good or bad, or that the movie itself is good or bad, just they did the wrong person for the wrong thing. So maybe people just need to adjust here.
Yeah, I was giving an example to somebody the other day on the phone that, how we can experience secret language on a day-to-day basis. For any of us that have kids, I have 3 adult kids now, but when they were little kids, in order to get them to eat their vegetables, if you tell a kid, hey, eat your broccoli, they're not going to eat the broccoli. But when we turn it into an airplane, speak their language, they'll eat it. Right.
Yeah.
It's sort of the same thing. It's like there's I actually got an email from somebody the other day. An advanced reader of my book had sent me an email saying that his grandkids were visiting him. And he first told his grandson it's time to take a bath. And the grandson resisted. And then he thought about lingo and thought about what he'd learned from reading the book. And he's like, oh, maybe if I just speak the language of this kid. And he said, well, let's go play in the bubbles. Right. Suddenly the kid wants to take a bath. Right.
Interesting. Yeah.
Right? So it's speaking the language, the secret language of that target audience, whether your target audience is your 3-year-old grandson or, a 40-year-old consumer. That's what secret language is all about. So the last of the 5 steps, which we can't overlook because, of course, the book is called Lingo. The last step is called words. And it's the psychology of words, because words are like cues. I call them like smoke signals, and how you carefully use the words. This is so important in marketing. And one of the things I teach in Lingo are what I refer to as self-identifying questions. And I think it is, Robert, the absolute best way to send up a smoke signal to your ideal customer. What I mean by self-identifying questions is because we live in a world today, you can't, and your show is all about marketing, marketers for day. You can't market at people anymore. When you come at people, what do? They back up, right? So good marketing has to compel people and draw them forward. The idea of self-identifying questions is posing a question in your marketing that completes a thought process in your ideal customer's head. Now, the only way you can do that, again, is if you have done the work to understand their perspective. One of my favorite stories on this is one of my coaching clients I call her virtual assistant matchmaker. So she finds the perfect virtual assistant for businesses needing that type of support. And she was marketing herself as, a simple line, how to hire a virtual assistant, right? That's what was the inherent need, but it was not compelling, right? It doesn't, and honestly, most people don't necessarily know that's the solution to their problem. So what I suggest that you do, and these aligned with this idea of self-identifying questions, is to pose the question in her marketing: do you want your life back? Do you want your life back, right? Because that, again, if you're that person that is totally overwhelmed with trying to keep up with your tasks at hand, and you see the question, do you want your life back? It's like, yes, I do. Then you step forward and you find out the solution. The solution to that problem is hire a VA, and I can help you with that. But to stop people in their tracks in this busy, noisy world, self-identifying questions, in my opinion, are like nothing else. And I love to work with them. And with my coaching clients, we get into their marketing. I have them develop 5 to 7 self-identifying questions, which would be a great tip for your listeners, to come up with 5 to 7 absolutely compelling questions that stops your ideal customer in their tracks, because it's completing the thoughts that are already in their heads.
So do you have any advice for people if they're brainstorming those 5 to 7 questions on like what the starting point for that would be? Like, should they start off by asking like, do you want to blank, or do you want blank back? Or like, how does someone go about cracking that nut of just like writing some of those types of questions out?
Be your ideal customer. And if that's what I mean by walking in their shoes and understand their perspective, it doesn't matter how much of a stretch it is. If you are, if you're developing a technology or an app that is geared towards, a 15-year-old girl, then get to understand the perspective of that 15-year-old girl, right? Talk to some. Sit down. I mean, my kids, I have 3 millennials, and they're a great source of information for me to find out what's going on in the mindset of millennials. So go to wherever you need to go to understand their mindset, because, if you don't, you're coming from your perspective, and there's highly unlikely that you're going to fully understand. One of the things that fascinated me as far as a market shift was things like Snapchat and Facebook Live and Insta Stories. And I was fascinated by the temporary nature of everything and wondering what is all that about. And again, remembering, Robert, I'm a photographer, right? So much of my career has been based on archiving, creating photographs for people to hand down from generation to generation. And here, there's this whole cultural change towards, or is all these things temporary? And I wanted to understand it. So my understanding of it, from getting into the minds of millennials who are kind of driving this force, is that they are in fact picking and choosing what's important in their lives and what is just a temporary experience. There's a way in which we just want, and I totally get it now, and I love Insta stories. There's a way in which I want to just have people share in that moment, but it doesn't necessarily need to be archived. It's not that moments aren't important. It's just, I actually really like the value difference. What I see as a value shift in the world is from people just really deciding what's important to them and what's not. And this is just a temporary moment. This is just an opportunity for me to stream a concert that I'm at and put it on Facebook, and my friends can enjoy it in that moment. But it doesn't hold the value that I need to latch onto it and hold onto it forever, right? But you can only, as a marketer, and as a business serving millennials, for example, you'd have to understand that that's important to them. And I do coach a number of photographers, and I see these photographers trying to push the importance of, wedding albums, and you must archive your future, and you're going to want this when you're on your 50th wedding anniversary. And I'm saying, you know what? That actually may be true, but it's probably not going to get you the job. What may get you the job is, do you also have the service when you're photographing a wedding that maybe you live stream the wedding for the bride and groom? Because that's what they want. That's going to get the job, right? So the wedding album might be good medicine, but tapping into their secret language and understanding what's important to them, that gets you the job in the first place.
Interesting. I love it. And I can see why this is kind of the final and the biggest part of the system, because like just what I've been hearing a lot from all this is that, there's those things that we like, we're always too close to our own business, and we have some idea for like a book or a product or a website or an app or whatever it is. And we are kind of stuck in our own thinking, and we kind of sometimes think, well, I'll just make what I want to make and then kind of put it out there and people will just love it. But I don't know about you, but I kind of learned after a couple of years, like that was like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. And what took a lot of just kind of trial and error, or just like thinking about or figuring it out, was to kind of do it the opposite way, the correct way of looking at what people need and then kind of conforming to that, even if we might think it's weird or silly or stupid at first. Like I think back to like, I'm a computer programmer nerd kind of dude. So I would create content and make blog posts and put out products of all this like fancy schmancy stuff. And it turns out people wanted the really beginner basic stuff. And for a couple of years there, I really ignored that because I thought, oh, whatever, that's boring. Who wants that? But then I kept having to have the message sort of repeated back to me over and over about what people wanted. And then I was like, okay, like what I want doesn't matter that much. What matters is what path they go through, what their first impression is of you, what they want to be able to do. And then you kind of fit to that. That's definitely the path to least resistance, at least I think.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. I actually start the book Lingo off with that scenario, saying that most businesses are built backwards. Most businesses are built just as you had said. Great concept, great idea. I'm going to build it. And then they spend the rest of the time trying to hunt down people to fit into that square peg in a round hole. And it is an exhausting process and not one that always ends well. The right way to build a business is to really understand the perspective of your ideal customer, the people that you're, in business, there's this question that's in marketing anyway, there's this question that's often asked, which is whom are you for? And the way people instantly think about that is they try to identify the audience. And what I say is, no, flip that around. Whom are you for? Who are you? What are your values? What's your perspective? What are your innate qualities that you already harbor? And then decide who's that for. Because, if you have a wicked sense of humor or a vulgar language, like that's not for everybody. But who is it for? Right? Comedians have done this very well. They've carved out their audiences. They know they're not for everybody. So when asking the question, whom are you for? The first person to look at is yourself. And then decide who would love this. That's actually the name of one of my chapters in the book. Who would love that? Right? Because that's really what you want to, if this is who I am and what I have to offer, who would love that? Build a business for them. That is the path of least resistance, is to first look inward, identify, whom are you best for? Who would love who you are? And then who wants that, and build a business for them. That is, as you said, it's the path of least resistance.
You're really blowing my mind here. So it sounds like a lot of us out there, like we have good ideas and we're close, but maybe missing the mark, and we need to go through your book, your process to kind of like reinvent ourselves, or to take those raw materials and kind of present ourselves in a better way, and run through those kind of lenses of perspective, familiarity, style, pricing, and words. And so you've mentioned that you do coaching, and you mentioned this book. So can you let us know where we can find all this stuff and where we can find out everything you're up to these days?
Sure. And actually, we've put together a page just for your audience because I do like to speak the lingo of the people I'm reaching. So go to jeffreyshaw.com/Robert Plank. So it's jeffreyshaw.com/Robert Plank. And we've put together there, actually, what I'm really excited about, we put together a free Lingo Media Kit, which will accomplish much of what you had just asked for. I mean, in that Lingo Media Kit, there's the 5-step secret language strategy laid out as an infographic. So you have a visual of it right up front. There's a free chapter in the book. And then there's also, which is kind of awesome, there's an audio free chapter, which is more than your normal audio. It actually has sound effects to it, has extra content in it that's not in the book. So that's all part of the media kit. And it's free. Your listeners can go ahead and grab that.
Awesome. Sound effects, you kind of piqued my interest here. What kind of sound effects are we talking?
Well, it's, you and I are podcasters. So to me, and I'm hoping I actually can take the entire audiobook this way. So the chapter we chose to offer free is the chapter on perspective, because I think it's so foundational. And I start the chapter off by talking about a vacation I took to a little island off the coast of Maine, and how, I hated this. When I landed there, I went through great effort to get there. And I was furious with my friend who recommended I go to this island, because when I first landed, I'm like, this is not my style. There was electricity only a couple hours a day. There were no locks on the doors. The bed was held up by a bunch of books because there was a leg missing. And I'm like, this is not the level of luxury that I'm accustomed to. So I was ready to bail on this trip. But then I spent just a little bit of time because there's only one boat on and one boat off the island. So I had to kill a few hours anyway. And in that few hours, my entire perspective changed. I saw it for what it was, and I appreciated it for what it was. And it taught me a huge lesson about perspective. So in this audio version, as you're taking the boat ride, there's waves crashing, there's ship bells clanking. There's a part of the book where I tell where there was a huge migration of people walking down the street. I'm not going to tell you where they ended up because you have to listen to the book or read the book to understand like where they ended up. But there's footsteps going along these dirt trails, and so we had a ball doing it. My podcast production team and I, because we kind of do things like this in the podcast. So I decided I wanted every chapter of the book to feel like an individual podcast episode.
Well, great. Well, that's part of your secret language, right? And
you got it.
Yeah. And kind of making things fun, as opposed to just some person, reading the audiobook in like just a monotone, boring fashion, like you're back in school. Like it sounds like this is a lot of fun, and it's been a lot of fun just kind of looking at these things in a different way, because like I don't know about you, but sometimes sometimes I talk about like business stuff, and I'm not really like, I don't have a business degree or anything like that, but sometimes I'll talk to some of these like NBA type of dudes, and they'll kind of load it up with like all this jargon and on all these kinds of terms, and I'm just like, what the heck are you talking about? All this like Six Sigma, this and that. But thanks for making this all kind of like relatable and a good time, and like just like thinking about all these kind of fun brands, like like the Starbucks, the Chipotle, the Chick-fil-A or whatever. They all kind of have their own unique character that makes them stand out. So lots of just tons of stuff to chew on, especially how we can apply it to our own business, and no matter what size, no matter where it is. So everyone make sure to go to jeffreyshaw.com/Robert Plank and get that Lingo Media Kit, the infographic, the audio free chapter. And then, and if you like what you see, then go and grab the book and contact Jeff if you want to move things to the next level. So any like final thoughts to wrap things up here as we're signing off, Jeff?
Well, I love what you were saying earlier, like just start being aware of it in your everyday life. You start realizing that this is the way people are communicating. People are communicating on their own frequency, their own secret language. Just go out and start having fun with it. Because I'm like you, I don't have any business degrees. I went to photography school for a year, and I was in business by the age of 20. So this is real life stuff. Like that's what I love about talking about this. Like the whole book comes from a real life experience. So I charge everyone to just go out and start seeing it. Start seeing how businesses and brands, and even just on a day-to-day life, people are communicating with you in their own wavelength, their own secret language, and then you'll gain the power of that to understand how you can use it in your own business.
Well, we're never going to be able to unsee it. It's like that saying, once the mind is stretched, it can't go back
Yes.
to its original position. Like that's what I think will happen to everyone who completed listening to this episode. Whichever one you're listening, you finished listening to this episode. So make sure now that you're at the end point to go to jeffreyshaw.com/Robert Plank. And anytime you're out and about now, you're not going to be able to unsee the things that Jeffrey mentioned today in the show. So great stuff. Lots of things for us to think about and do in our business moving forward. And thanks, Jeff, for stopping by and sharing some of this great stuff with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to share it.
Please subscribe, rate, and review our show at marketeroftheday.com/iTunes and like us on Facebook at marketeroftheday.com